Have you ever wondered how a simple prayer can transform lives and change the course of history? In the pages of the history of the Catholic Church, few saints have left as deep an imprint as Saint Dominic of Guzmán, a man whose unshakable faith and devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary led him to spread one of the most powerful prayers in Christianity, the Holy Rosary. This humble Spanish preacher not only founded the order of preachers known as the Dominicans, but also received from the very hand of the Mother of God the spiritual weapon that has guided countless souls towards salvation over the centuries. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Chosen One. In the warm land of Castile, under the starry sky of medieval Spain, a child destined for holiness was born. It was the year 1170 when, in Caleruega, a small village in the province of Burgos, Juana de Aza gave birth to her third child. Before his birth, the noble lady had a prophetic dream. She saw in her womb a little dog with a torch lit at its snout, a symbol that her child would illuminate the world with faith and preaching. The time of Dominic of Guzmán's birth was one of great contrasts in medieval Europe. The 12th century experienced a cultural and religious rebirth with the flourishing of universities and the great Gothic cathedrals. However, it was also a time of deep crisis in the Church. The Crusades were in full swing. The great schism between East and West had separated the Catholic and Orthodox churches just over a century earlier, and various heresies threatened the unity of faith in the West. Papal power was in constant tension with European emperors and kings over matters of jurisdiction and authority. Dominic's parents, Felix de Guzmán and Juana de Aza, both of noble lineage and deep Christian faith, raised their son in the fear of God from his earliest years. Their home was a true sanctuary of Christian virtues, where prayer, charity, and the study of the sacred scriptures were part of everyday life. Spain, at that time, was divided into several Christian kingdoms, fighting the Reconquista against the Muslims, creating an atmosphere of religious fervor and chivalric spirit that undoubtedly influenced young Dominic. From his very early childhood, Dominic showed extraordinary signs of piety. While other children played, he sought moments of solitude to speak with God. His mother watched in amazement as the little one, barely able to talk, already babbled prayers and displayed unusual compassion for the poor and the sick. According to contemporary accounts, even as a very young child, he was often found sleeping on the hard floor instead of in his bed, practicing the mortifications that would later characterize his adult life. His devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary took deep root in his heart from an early age. He was often found gazing at images of the Mother of God, as if foreshadowing the special mission that she would entrust to him years later. This Marian devotion was characteristic of medieval spirituality, which saw a flourishing of the cult of the Virgin Mary expressed in the numerous cathedrals dedicated to Our Lady built throughout Europe. When he turned 7, his parents entrusted his education to his maternal uncle, the archpriest of the church in Gumiel de Izan, who instilled in young Dominic not only a love for literature, but also a solid formation in Catholic doctrine, preparing him for the glorious destiny that divine providence had in store for him. Chapter 2. Years of Formation and Divine Calling. At the age of 14, Dominic was sent to the prestigious school in Palencia, one of the most renowned centers of learning of the time. There, his brilliant intelligence and thirst for knowledge soon made him an exceptional student. For 10 years, he devoted himself fervently to the study of the liberal arts and sacred theology, disciplines in which he notably excelled. But beyond his academic brilliance, what truly set Dominic apart was his extraordinary charity. During a terrible famine that struck Palencia, the young student, moved by the suffering of the poor, even sold his precious books to help the hungry. "How could I study using dead skins while my brothers are dying of hunger?" he replied when questioned about his actions. This heroic gesture already revealed the depth of his evangelical spirit. Bishop Martin de Bazan, impressed by the young Dominic's virtues and wisdom, invited him to join the cathedral chapter of Osma. There, under the guidance of Prior Diego de Acebes, Dominic embraced the rule of St. Augustine and was ordained a priest. His life in the chapter was marked by long hours of prayer, study of the scriptures, and an austerity that astonished his fellow canons. In the silence of the cloister during the nocturnal vigils, Dominic shed tears for sinners. "Lord, what will become of the sinners?" he frequently repeated, clutching the crucifix. This burning compassion for the salvation of souls was forging within him an apostolic zeal that would soon find its providential course. The decisive moment came when King Alfonso VIII of Castile charged Bishop Diego de Acebes with a diplomatic mission to Denmark. Diego chose Dominic as his travel companion, not knowing that this journey would forever change the course of the saint's life and the history of the Church. Chapter 3. The encounter with the Albigensian heresy. It was during his journey to Denmark, while passing through southern France, that Dominic came face to face with the devastating reality of the Albigensian heresy. The Albigensians, or Cathars as they were also known, professed a dualism that considered matter to be inherently evil, rejected the sacraments, and denied the incarnation of Christ. This heresy had spread like a poison throughout the Languedoc region, seducing both nobles and peasants alike. While staying in Toulouse, Dominic spent an entire night dialoguing with the innkeeper who had fallen into the nets of this false doctrine. With infinite patience and wisdom illuminated by the Holy Spirit, the saint managed to bring that man back into the fold of the Catholic Church. This first triumph ignited within his heart the flame of an apostolic zeal that would never be extinguished. On his return from the diplomatic mission, Dominic and Bishop Diego visited Pope Innocent III in Rome to request permission to evangelize the pagan peoples of Northern Europe. However, the pontiff asked them to dedicate their efforts to combating the Albigensian heresy in southern France, a mission deemed more urgent for the Church at that time. With papal blessing, they both headed to the Languedoc region and joined the pontifical legates already working there. They soon realized that the methods employed up to then were fruitless. The papal preachers traveled with great pomp and luxury, which contrasted sharply with the austerity of the perfect Cathars, winning over the sympathy of the people. Diego and Dominic then introduced a radical change in the missionary strategy. They adopted a life of evangelical poverty, traveling barefoot from village to village without money or supplies, relying entirely on divine providence. This humble preaching, accompanied by public debates with the heretics, began to bear fruit, showing the path that the future order of preachers would follow. Chapter 4. The founding of the Order of Preachers. The death of Bishop Diego de Acebes in 1207 left Dominic alone at the forefront of the mission against the Albigensians. Far from being discouraged, the saint intensified his apostolic efforts. Aware that the conversion of the heretics required well-formed and virtuous preachers, he began to gather around him men willing to follow his example of evangelical poverty and itinerant preaching. In 1214, Dominic established in Prouille a small monastery for women converted from Catharism. This monastery, the first of what would become the Dominican order, became a center of prayer for the success of the preaching mission. The sisters, dedicated to the contemplative life, supported the apostolic work of the friars with their prayers and penances. This feminine contemplative dimension would always be an essential part of the Dominican charism, demonstrating the complementarity between active and contemplative life within the same religious family. Shortly thereafter, Bishop Fulco of Toulouse, recognizing the value of Dominic's work, granted him the Church of Saint-Romain and some adjacent houses to establish a community of preachers. There in 1215, the community that would become the germ of the Order of Preachers was officially born. The exact date of this founding, April 25th, 1215, is considered the official birth of the Dominican order, though its papal approval would come later. With an initial group of only 6 companions, Dominic established a way of life that combined monastic tradition with the innovative mission of itinerant preaching. The community followed the rule of St. Augustine, but with its own constitutions that emphasized the study of the sacred scriptures, preaching for the salvation of souls, and the practice of evangelical poverty. What was truly revolutionary about the Dominican foundation was its governance structure. Unlike traditional monastic orders, the Order of Preachers adopted a democratic system where superiors were elected for limited terms and important decisions were made in chapters where all friars had a voice. This form of governance, inspired in part by the nascent Italian communes, was a novelty in the religious life of the 13th century. That same year, Dominic accompanied Bishop Fulco to the Fourth Lateran Council, where he hoped to obtain papal approval for his new foundation. Although Pope Innocent III welcomed the project favorably, the council had just decreed that no new religious orders should be established, recommending instead that new groups adopt existing rules. With humble obedience, Dominic accepted this setback and continued his work. Finally, on December 22, 1216, the new Pope Honorius III officially approved the order with the bull Religiosam Vitam, recognizing its unique character as an order dedicated specifically to preaching, a prerogative that had previously been exclusive to bishops. From its very beginning, the Order of Preachers was distinguished by 4 fundamental pillars that constitute its charism: communal life, liturgical prayer, constant study, and preaching for the salvation of souls. Unlike monks, the Dominicans were not bound to a monastery by a vow of stability. They could be sent wherever their preaching was needed. The motto of the order, Contemplata aliis tradere, to hand on to others the fruits of contemplation, perfectly sums up this balance between contemplation and apostolic action that characterizes Dominican spirituality. Chapter 5. The Miracle of Fanjeaux. In the small town of Fanjeaux, nestled among the hills of the French Languedoc, one of the most extraordinary miracles occurred that would confirm Saint Dominic's divine mission. It was the year 1206, and the region was steeped in the spiritual conflict between the Catholic faith and the Albigensian heresy. The Albigensian leaders, confident in the solidity of their arguments, proposed a public debate with the Catholic preachers. To decide which doctrine was true, they agreed to subject the writings of both sides to the test by fire, a common practice at the time to discern God's will. The chosen location was the castle of Fanjeaux, where nobles, clergymen, and common folk gathered to witness the extraordinary event. St. Dominic, with the serene confidence of one who serves the truth, submitted his manuscript containing arguments in defense of the Catholic faith. The Albigensians did the same with their books. A large bonfire was lit in the castle's courtyard, and in the midst of a solemn silence, both sets of writings were thrown into the flames. What happened next left all present astonished. The heretics' books were quickly consumed by the fire, reduced to ashes in a matter of moments. In contrast, St. Dominic's manuscript not only remained intact among the flames, but was miraculously expelled from the fire, rising into the air and landing on a wooden beam high above the ground. 3 times Dominic's book was thrown into the fire, and 3 times it emerged unscathed, leaving marks on the wooden beam that was preserved for centuries as a testimony to the wonder. Witnesses, amazed by such a divine manifestation, could not deny that God himself had intervened to confirm the truth of the Catholic doctrine preached by St. Dominic. This miracle, known as the Miracle of the Book or the Miracle of Fanjeaux, greatly strengthened the position of the Catholic preachers. Many Albigensians, moved by this clear sign, returned to the Church, while the Catholic faithful saw their faith and trust in the mission of that humble Spanish preacher renewed. Chapter 6. The Miracles of Toulouse. The city of Toulouse, the epicenter of the Albigensian heresy, was also the stage for astonishing miracles wrought by God through St. Dominic. These supernatural signs confirmed the preacher's holiness and the truth of the doctrine he taught with such fervor. During Lent in the year 1211, while preaching at the church of St. Saturninus, one of the oldest in Toulouse, an extraordinary event occurred. On a stormy afternoon when the church was filled with the faithful, a supernatural light illuminated Dominic's face as he preached about divine mercy. Those present marveled as 3 bright stars appeared above his head, radiating a glow that lit up the entire church. This prodigy was interpreted as a sign of the special divine illumination guiding his preaching. On another occasion, during a period of terrible drought that threatened the crops and brought the specter of hunger, the people of Toulouse turned to Dominic, imploring his intercession. Moved by the simple faith of the people, the saint prostrated himself in prayer for hours in the cathedral of St. Stephen. When he finally rose, he declared with certainty that rain would come before nightfall. The sky, completely clear at that moment, began to fill with clouds an hour later, and before sunset, abundant rain blessed the parched fields. Perhaps the most moving miracle of all was the resurrection of young Napoleon, the nephew of Cardinal Esteban de Fossanova. During a visit to Rome, the young man fell from his horse and died instantly. The cardinal, inconsolable, asked Dominic to intercede. After celebrating the Holy Mass, the saint approached the lifeless body, made the sign of the cross, and declared in a powerful voice, "Young Napoleon, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, I command you to rise." To the astonishment of all present, the young man was completely restored to life, as if awakening from a deep sleep. These and many other miracles confirmed that Dominic was indeed a true envoy of God. However, the saint never sought applause or admiration for these wonders. His humility led him to attribute everything to divine mercy and the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, whom he revered with filial devotion. Chapter 7. The Virgin Mary and the Revelation of the Holy Rosary. The year 1208 would mark a turning point in the life of Saint Dominic and in the history of Catholic spirituality. After years of tireless preaching against the Albigensian heresy, the saint began to feel the weight of the apparent failure of his mission. Despite his efforts, the heresy continued to spread, and conversions were few and far between. Grieved by this situation, Dominic withdrew to the forest near Prouille to devote himself to prayer and penance. For 3 days and 3 nights he fasted and mortified himself, subjecting his body to rigorous disciplines until he even shed blood. "Lord, what will become of the sinners?" he cried through tears. This practice of intense prayer and penance was characteristic of medieval saints, who sought to unite themselves with Christ's sufferings in order to obtain special graces for the Church and for sinners. On the 3rd day, exhausted from penance and consumed by apostolic zeal, he had a celestial vision. The Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to him, surrounded by angels and with an indescribable radiance. With maternal tenderness she said, "Dominic, my son, do not be disheartened by the scant fruit of your preaching. The soil you cultivate is too hard and is full of weeds. To soften it and make it fertile, it must be watered with the dew of the angelic salutation." The Virgin then explained that just as the Annunciation by the angel Gabriel had been the prelude to the world's salvation, the repetition of this salutation would be a powerful means to convert the heretics and sanctify the faithful. She taught him to pray the Rosary, combining the meditation on the mysteries of Christ's life, passion, and glory with the recitation of the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory. It is important to note that the Rosary in its primitive form was quite different from the one we know today. Originally, it consisted of the recitation of 150 Hail Marys, divided into 15 decades, each preceded by an Our Father, in correspondence with the 150 Psalms of the biblical Psalter, hence it was called the Psalter of the Virgin. The meditation on the mysteries gradually became structured over the centuries until it reached the traditional 15 mysteries, joyful, sorrowful, and glorious, to which Pope St. John Paul II would add, in 2002, the luminous mysteries. "Preach, my Psalter," said the Mother of God, handing him a rosary, "and you will see great conversions. This prayer will be an effective remedy against heresy, vice, and sin. It will promote virtue, attract divine blessings upon families, and obtain from my Son abundant mercies for souls." According to tradition, the first rosary given by the Virgin Mary to St. Dominic was made up of wooden beads strung on a rope, with a simple cross at the end. This model of material simplicity but deep spiritual richness would always characterize this devotion. Dominic received this heavenly gift with immense gratitude. He understood that it was not subtle theological arguments, but the simple and profound prayer of the Rosary that would win hearts for Christ. From that moment on, the Rosary became his primary weapon in preaching, teaching it to everyone, and spreading it with tireless zeal. The effectiveness of this devotion became evident when numerous Albigensians began to convert. The Rosary proved particularly effective against the Albigensian heresy because, while they denied the incarnation and the humanity of Christ, this prayer led them to contemplate precisely the mysteries of the Saviour's earthly life, from his conception to his resurrection and glorification. Blessed Alano de la Roche, a great promoter of the Rosary in the 15th century, recorded numerous testimonies about St. Dominic's Rosary preaching, stating, "By means of this prayer that he preached everywhere, Dominic converted more people than he did with all his sermons." And St. Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort would write centuries later, "The Blessed Virgin revealed to Blessed Alano that after the Holy Mass, the first and most vivid memorial of the Passion of Jesus Christ, there is no devotion more excellent and meritorious than the Rosary, which is like a second memorial and representation of the life and passion of Jesus Christ." Do you regularly pray the Holy Rosary? Share your experience in the comments. Chapter 8. The Miracle of the Tempest and the Power of the Rosary. The supernatural efficacy of the Holy Rosary soon manifested itself through an extraordinary prodigy that would be etched in the memory of the faithful. Shortly after the Blessed Virgin Mary entrusted St. Dominic with the mission of spreading this devotion, a surprising event occurred that would demonstrate the celestial power of this prayer. In a small town near Toulouse, while St. Dominic was preaching about the virtues of the Rosary, a violent tempest suddenly broke out. The sky darkened as if it were a pitch-black night, and dazzling lightning tore through the clouds, followed by deafening thunder. The rain began to fall so heavily that it threatened to flood the area where the saint was preaching outdoors. Panic seized the crowd, which began to disperse in search of shelter. However, St. Dominic remained calm amid the chaos. With a powerful voice that rose above the storm's roar, he urged the faithful to stay in their places and lift their hearts to the Blessed Virgin by praying the Rosary. "Trust in the power of the Mother of God," he exclaimed, raising his own rosary. "If all of us together implore her protection through this holy prayer, the tempest will subside." With wavering yet hopeful faith, the crowd stayed and began to recite the Hail Marys following Dominic's lead. The miracle did not take long. As they advanced in their prayer, the tempest began to abate. The lightning became less frequent, the thunder moved away, and the rain gradually ceased. Even more astonishing, while everything around them was soaked by the torrential downpour, the area where Dominic and the faithful gathered remained completely dry, as if an invisible hand had extended a protective canopy over them. Not a single drop of water fell in that place. This miracle deeply moved those present. Many Albigensian heretics among the crowd, witnessing the supernatural power of the Rosary, renounced their errors and asked to be readmitted into the Catholic Church. The faithful, for their part, committed to praying the Rosary daily and spreading this devotion among family and friends. Chapter 9. Apostolic Journeys and Preaching with the Holy Rosary as his spiritual weapon, and the blessing of Pope Honorius III, who finally approved the order of preachers in 1216. Dominic embarked on a series of apostolic journeys that would cover much of Europe. His strategy was bold: to establish convents in university cities where the friars could receive intellectual formation and preach with doctrinal solidity. Rome became the first destination of his missionary expansion. In the Eternal City, Dominic founded the convent of St. Sixtus for the friars and reformed the monastery of Santa Maria in Trastevere for the Dominican nuns. His preaching in the Roman basilicas attracted numerous vocations, including men of great culture and social standing, such as Blessed Reginald of Orleans, a renowned professor of canon law. From Rome, Dominic sent his first disciples to establish convents in the great university centers of Europe. "Go and preach, for this is what we have been called to do," he would say as he sent them off. Bologna, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, and Oxford soon boasted Dominican communities dedicated to study and preaching. In 1219, Dominic himself traveled to Spain, his native land, where he founded convents in Madrid, Segovia, and Barcelona. His preaching kindled hearts, and many young people, drawn by his example of evangelical poverty and apostolic zeal, joined the order. In every place he visited, he fervently taught the devotion of the Holy Rosary, establishing confraternities for its daily recitation. Eastern Europe also received the Dominican seed. Dominic sent friars to Hungary, Poland, and Scandinavia, demonstrating a universal missionary vision. He even dreamed of preaching himself among the Cumans, a pagan people of the Russian steppes, a desire he never fulfilled, but which reveals the breadth of his zeal for the salvation of souls. Throughout his journeys, Dominic was distinguished by his personal austerity. He always walked on foot, often barefoot, even on rocky terrain and during the harsh winter. He carried no provisions, relying entirely on divine providence. He spent his nights in prayer and during the day preached tirelessly, alternating doctrinal firmness with the sweetness of evangelical charity. Chapter 10. His final earthly days. The summer of 1221 found Dominic physically exhausted but spiritually consoled by the sight of his order spreading throughout Europe. After presiding over the second general chapter in Bologna, where he reorganized the order into 8 provinces, he felt his strength waning rapidly. A persistent fever, likely a symptom of tuberculosis, began to consume his body, already weakened by years of austerities and apostolic labor. Despite his evident decline, Dominic continued to preach in the streets of Bologna until, by the end of July, he fell gravely ill. Alarmed by the seriousness of his condition, the friars transferred him from the sweltering city to the monastery of Monte Mario, hoping that the cooler air of the hills would alleviate his suffering. However, aware that his hour was near, Dominic requested to be taken back to the convent of St. Nicholas in Bologna. "Let me die at my brother's feet," he pleaded humbly. Once back at the convent, he gathered his friars around his bed. In a weak yet serene voice, he gave them his final recommendations. "Have charity, preserve humility, and observe voluntary poverty. Let my inheritance be charity, my possession humility, and my treasure poverty." He then added a promise that has comforted generations of Dominicans. "Do not weep. I shall be of greater use to you after my death, and will help you more effectively than during my life." As the friars, through tears, began to pray for the dying, Dominic asked them to wait. With remarkable clarity, he arranged his final wishes, ensuring that all his possessions, which were nothing more than his habit, his sandals, and his breviary, were distributed appropriately. He requested to be buried at the feet of my brothers as a sign of his deep humility. Finally, on the afternoon of August 6, 1221, the feast of the Transfiguration of the Lord, Dominic surrendered his soul to God. He was only 51 years old, but had accomplished an apostolic work that would transform the Church for centuries to come. The present friars testified that at the moment of his death a celestial fragrance filled the room, and some even claim to have seen his soul ascend to heaven in the form of a resplendent star. Chapter 11. Canonization and spiritual legacy. The news of Dominic's passing spread quickly throughout Europe, causing immense grief, but also extraordinary popular devotion. The faithful began to make pilgrimages to his tomb in the Church of St. Nicholas in Bologna, where numerous miracles confirmed the sanctity of the founder of the preachers. Despite these clear signs of holiness, the Dominican friars, true to the spirit of humility instilled in them by their founder, did not rush to request his canonization. It was Pope Gregory IX, who had personally known Dominic when he was Cardinal Ugolino, who took the initiative. In 1233, just 12 years after his death, the pontiff solemnly inscribed Dominic of Guzmán in the catalogue of saints. The canonization ceremony, celebrated in Rieti, was an occasion of great joy for the entire church. In his homily, Pope Gregory IX compared St. Dominic to the apostles for his zeal in preaching the gospel, and to Moses for his leadership as the lawgiver of a new religious family. "I found in him a man who fully embraced the life of apostolic service, and I have no doubt that he has joined the glory of the apostles in heaven," declared the pontiff. In the canonization bull, Gregory IX wrote, "In the church militant, he testified to the faith which, thanks to his fervent preaching and the example of his virtues, ignited many peoples. In the church triumphant, he is crowned with glory and honor, as attested by the miracles that God has willed to perform through his intercession." In 1267, the remains of the saint were transferred to a more dignified tomb sculpted by Nicola Pisano in the same church in Bologna, now known as the Basilica of Saint Dominic. During this translation, when the old tomb was opened, a supernatural fragrance emanated from the incorrupt body, astonishing those present. Blessed Jordan of Saxony, Dominic's immediate successor as Master General of the Order, left this beautiful testimony about the founder. He was a man of unyielding austerity toward himself, yet full of sweetness toward others. He was the comfort of the afflicted and the only refuge of the miserable. Nothing disturbed the equality of his soul, not the hardships of the journey, nor the vigils, nor the labors. He always showed a peaceful and joyful countenance, a reflection of the inner serenity that filled his soul. The spiritual legacy of St. Dominic has endured through the centuries in multiple dimensions. The order of preachers he founded has given the Church great saints such as St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Albert the Great, St. Catherine of Siena, St. Martin de Porres, and St. Rose of Lima, among many others. The Dominicans have excelled in theology, philosophy, sacred art, and the defense of justice and human rights, always faithful to the charism of preaching the truth. In 2010, Pope Benedict XV recalled, "St. Dominic wished to emphasize theology, the serious and scientific study of the truths of the faith, for he and his followers were to preach under the light of reason as well as through the testimony of their lives." Indeed, the cultural influence of the Dominicans has been immense throughout history. In the medieval universities, the preaching friars held chairs in theology and philosophy, decisively contributing to the intellectual flourishing of the West. The philosophical theological system of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Summa Theologiae, remains a pillar of Catholic thought to this day. In the arts, painters such as Fra Angelico, himself a Dominican, captured the beauty of faith in immortal works. In the social field, figures like Bartolomé de las Casas fought for the dignity of the indigenous peoples of the Americas at the dawn of colonization. But perhaps the most universal legacy of St. Dominic has been the devotion to the Holy Rosary. This Marian catechesis spread throughout the Catholic world, becoming one of the most beloved prayers among the faithful. Popes, saints, and millions of believers have found in the Rosary a sure path to approach Christ through Mary, just as St. Dominic taught. Pope St. John Paul II, in his apostolic letter Rosarium Virginis Mariae, 2002, stated, "The Rosary, although it is marked by its Marian character, is a prayer centered on Christology. To contemplate with Mary is in truth to remember Christ, to learn from him, to conform oneself to him, to supplicate him, and to proclaim him. Today, the Dominican family remains alive and active in the Church and in the world, composed of friars, contemplative nuns, sisters of apostolic life, and lay people. The mission of Saint Dominic to preach the truth that is Christ continues unabated. Present on all 5 continents, the Order of Preachers maintains its commitment to study, teaching, and the preaching of the gospel. In universities, parishes, missions, media, and centers for social promotion, the sons and daughters of Saint Dominic continue to bring the light of Christ to every corner of the world, faithful to the charism received from their founder more than 800 years ago. Chapter 12. Prayer to Saint Dominic of Guzmán. Glorious. Saint Dominic of Guzmán, chosen by God to be the light of the Church and the apostle of truth, we humbly kneel before you, confident in your powerful intercession. You who received from the hands of the Blessed Virgin Mary the precious treasure of the Holy Rosary, teach us to love and recite this prayer with the same devotion with which you propagated it. May it be for us, as it was for you, a school of contemplation of the divine mysteries and a shield against the temptations of the enemy. O holy preacher of the divine word, obtain for us the grace to always live according to the teachings of the gospel. May we be able to bear witness to our faith not only with words, but also with works of charity, as you did when you sold even your precious books to feed the hungry. Father of the Order of Preachers, protect your sons and daughters who follow your charism throughout the Church. May they remain faithful to the heritage you left them, the love of truth, devoted study, zeal for the salvation of souls, and filial devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Intercessor for sinners, pray for all those who have strayed from the faith or live in the darkness of error. Just as in life you shed tears of compassion for the sinners, obtain for them now the light of truth and the grace of conversion. Finally, Saint Dominic, humble servant of the Lord, teach us to detach ourselves from the vanities of this world and to seek only eternal goods. May we make our spiritual heritage charity, humility, and voluntary poverty. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.